As we begin to meet with our disciples, we need a simple, reproducible way for them to pass along the essential elements of what we are training them in and ensure that that gets multiplied to the next generation and ensure that the things that we're training them in are actually being worked out in their life. So a lot of people around the world are using the 3/3 format. We are going to show a modified version today that goes up, in, and out. The 3/3 format was developed by Ying Kai, a missionary with the International Mission Board. So let's dig into this. So 3 sections, up, in, and out, or 3/3, 1, 2, 3. And as we begin to gather, we're going to initially connect in the place of care and worship. And this doesn't have to be somebody with a guitar. It can be simply and reproducibly done with a video, or even just sitting in silence and praying and waiting on the Lord, engaging in the Lord's Supper. From there, it's really important that we are following up on the things that people are committing to, the tools that they're engaging in, the goals that they're committing to. So there's a time of accountability from there. And we've boiled this down to the simplicity of following and fishing. So we begin to ask each other, how is it going following Jesus, and how is it going fishing for disciples and making disciples? This comes from Mark chapter 1, as Jesus invites his disciples to follow him and become fishers of men. And so these two important elements of what does it look like to follow Jesus, and then how are we doing in multiplying these things to more disciples and seeing that multiply out generationally. Finally, as we look up in connecting with God and getting his perspective, we need to have big vision, and that needs to be communicated clearly and consistently. And I think it's helpful. It's been said that vision is like a leaky bucket, that it is constantly needing to be replenished because it's constantly draining out. We need to constantly be dialing back into what is the vision that we're going after and communicating it in such a way that it's really clear that everybody can follow along. And we've used head, heart, and hands, or thinkers, feelers, doers, to be able to communicate this really clearly. Thinkers or head people want to hear facts and reason and understand how does this work strategically. Heart people, they want to connect in this way that's giving an example to follow, or a recent story, a testimony that grabs a hold of that vision in a real heartfelt way. This is oftentimes your shepherds, your teachers, those who really want to experience this in a more heart level way. Then there's the hands, and these are those that need to do it. They need to engage with it in order to understand this vision. So we'll sometimes have people break up into pairs and articulate that vision to one another. And this can help in articulating that vision. Next, we go in, and this is where a new teaching is introduced. And we use a discovery Bible study method for doing this in a real simple way that asks 3 basic questions. What does this say about God? What does this say about people? And how can we respond? So you can begin to engage in short-term discipleship using a story set of the commands of Christ, and later on begin to engage in more long-term discipleship as you study the Bible together through books of the Bible. But asking these 3 basic questions: what does this say about God? What does this say about people? And how can I respond to this? And so you want to give a lot of time for people to interact here, a lot of time for people to share, and leave this open-ended. And oftentimes we've found that as we begin to do this, initially people are quiet, even for the first week or 2 or first few meetings. But then they begin to open up, and they begin to discover from these stories the real nature of God in it. And then they begin to see the examples of people to respond to, and they begin to take action. And especially if you're following up with this week to week, how is that going as you're following Jesus in response to these stories? It's really going to begin to settle in, and it's going to begin to help people to put this into practice. So it's important that we use some short-term discipleship stories early on that have an example to follow, because this really gives people something to begin to do and begin to enact in their life in a way that they can live out. So Luke 7 with the story of the sinful woman is a good example of this, where we see this woman coming in, falling at the feet of Jesus, beginning to tangibly, visibly repent in tears. And then we see Jesus beginning to interact with her and those present, and ultimately he declares her sins forgiven. But her response here gives us an example to follow as we begin to respond to this. One more note here: we will oftentimes pause in between here and take a moment, even a few minutes, and just pray. And in this time of prayer, we'll just wait on God and ask him to speak, because we don't want to just come up with our own ideas of how to respond. We really want to listen to Jesus and begin to respond to what he's saying to us personally. So take a few minutes, even set a timer on your phone and wait and pray, and then share in the group, what did God say to you for how you should respond to this specific story? So finally, we're going to go out by setting some goals and by practicing. So the place of practice can look like retelling the story from the week. So as this story is shared up here, we're not going to break into smaller groups and practice that story. It can also look like practicing simple tools that as we're getting together, we want to begin to practice a way to share the gospel. Share your story and have everybody go around the circle and share their personal testimony. You could use a tool like 15-second story, or you could use a tool that's popular like the 3 circles. But practicing a simple tool during this time is critical to ensuring that we are training disciples and not just passing along information. And then some sort of goal setting where it can be in conjunction with this response time. How are we going to respond to this passage this week? Or what is God leading us to do, or people that he's leading us to share the gospel with or train in discipleship? Finally, we're going to end our time in the place of prayer or commissioning. And so sometimes people will use the Great Commission here, or they will just have a simple time of somebody praying and praying us out for that time. But you can use a different variety of things, but make sure that you are sending out at the end of your time in the place of prayer to end it all out. So as you use this format to make disciples, this is not a formula, but there are some important pieces in here, and that are these. If you do nothing else when you get together, make sure that you spend some time following up on how did things go. Make sure that you cast vision every time that you meet. And then finally, make sure that there is a time of practicing and goal setting. So if everything gets time crunched and you can't get to everything, it's absolutely critical that as we are focusing on being disciples that make disciples, that we are following up on how things are going, that we're continuing to cast vision, and that we are taking time to practice and making plans for how we're going to respond to this week. So even if you don't have time to engage in a new lesson, or you don't have time to engage in worship or care, make sure that there's a time of practicing and goal setting and following up on how things have gone and casting vision. So hope that's helpful. Bless you guys.